All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mindanao. Welcome to the Mindanao Arts and Culture Council Senatorial Forum 2022. My name is Shai Daison, and I will be your moderator and host for this forum. Tonight, we are joined by 5 of our invited senatorial candidates who accepted our invitation and our challenge for the tonight's Senatorial Forum 2022. Now, to formally begin the program, may I request everyone to please settle down and take a moment of silence for our prayer to be led to us by Mr. Hosea.
Let us put ourselves in the loving presence of our Lord. Let us make the sign of our faith. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity that you've given us tonight to gather under one cause to help us make informed decisions as to who we will vote for in the upcoming May 9 national elections. May you grant us clarity and patience, Lord. May you help us make the right and informed decisions according to what we will find out tonight, Lord. We thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to exhibit your will and be instruments of your love and mercy. This we ask through your name. Amen.
Okay, magandang gabi po muli sa ating lahat at welcome po sa ating Senatorial Forum 2022. Ngayong gabi ay maririnig po natin ang mga plataforma at mga polisiya, planong programa ng ating mga naimbitahang mga kandidato na tumatakbo bilang pagkasenador sa darating na halalan ngayong Mayo 9. Tayo po ay live na napapanood sa ating official Facebook ng Mindanao Culture and Arts Council or MACC. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we will have an interactive and intelligent discussion with our invited senatorial candidates. This MACC Senatorial Forum is conducted to further help guide our Filipino voters in choosing on who to vote for the next set of senators this coming election. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the MACC MACCVERSATIONS Senatorial Forum 2022. All right, so for the introduction of our senatorial candidates, I will first introduce them individually, and then they will be given 30 seconds to 1 minute to introduce themselves however they want to. Okay, all right, so, but before that, can we ask first our candidates and our guests to have our photo opportunity first? Okay, so let's do the Maisy pose. Okay. All right. So the Maisy pose is like this. Okay, so to our guests, to our candidates, and also to our panelists. Okay, shall we do the Maisy pose? Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, technical team, do you still have second page for that?
Yes, please.
Okay, for the second page, still? Okay. All right, so before we formally start, I will introduce to you our invited senatorial candidates this evening. And then they will be given a minute, maximum of 1 minute to introduce themselves. First off, we have senatorial candidate attorney Agnes Bailen. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
You may introduce yourself, ma'am.
Ngayon na ba? Akala ko you're gonna be calling muna the senatorial candidates before we are allowed to introduce ourselves. That's what you explained earlier.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So you want me now to introduce myself?
Yes, attorney. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
okay, Shay. Okay, so magandang gabi po sa inyo. Ako po si Agnes Bailen, isa pong abogado dating guro po, researcher, bioethicist po, at ngayon po ay isang estudyante po ng Public Administration po sa UP na tinatapos po ang kanyang PhD thesis. Ang title po, ang Role ng Culture in National Development. Bakit ito po ang aking pinili po? Dahil po ako po ay isang anak po ng isang anthropologist at isang opera singer po. At na-realize ko po na napaka-importante po ng sining at kultura po sa paghubog po ng character po ng isang tao po. At napaka-importante rin po ito para ma-unify po natin ang sambayan ng Pilipinas na ngayon po watak-watak po. At kung ako po ay papalarin po na maging senador po, dadagdagan ko po ang budget po ng kultura po at ng sining po dahil sa ngayon, less than, I think 0.01% yata ng ating budget ngayon ay nakalaan po sa art at culture po. So maraming salamat po sa panahon na binibigay niyo po sa amin para ipakilala po namin ang aming sarili at kung paano namin matutulungan po ang sining at kultura sa Pilipinas, lalong-lalo na po sa Mindanao.
Thank you very much, Attorney Agnes Bailen. Let us now call on Senatorial candidate Mr. Roy Cabonero. Good evening, sir.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Pasensya na po at ako'y nasa proseso pa ako ng pag-uwi, no? Galing Mindanao. So ako po'y nasa coffee shop lang. So medyo maingay po ang aking background. Ako po si Roy Cabonegro, number 12 po sa balota. Tumatakbo po sa ilalim ng Partido Lakas ng Masa kung saan kami ay nakaalyado, ang grupo ko, ang Makakalikasan ng Nature Party Philippines. Tumatakbo po ako sa ilalim ng agenda ng pangangailangan nating magkaroon ng maayos na actions sa ating mga problema sa kalikasan, lalong-lalo na ang matinding problema natin ng klima. No? In 5 years time, inaasahan na umabot ang mundo beyond 1.5 degrees global mean temperature. Ito po ay isang senyales na tayo po iaabot na sa tinatawag nating runaway climate, na maaari kong mapaliwanag mamaya. Ang mahalaga pong malaman sa ngayon is that ito pong 5 taon na darating ay make or break po ito para sa sangkatauhan. Kung hindi ay tayo po iaabot talaga sa sangkaterbang mga problema na hindi pa ho natin nararanasan sa buong buhay natin bilang isang sangkatauhan. At hindi na po ito basta madadala ng mga individual o kolektibong aksyon ng mga komunidad, mga organisasyon. Nangangailangan na po ito ng intervention ng Estado. Ito po ang kadahilan kung kaya't ang tulad ko na hindi naman talaga politiko, 20 taong maigit na nagsilbi sa mga komunidad sa iba't ibang bahagi ng environmental management, ay napilitan pong tumakbo at sumabak sa gawaing hindi naman namin nakasanayan dahil napapanahon na pong aksyonan ang ating maraming problema sa kalikasan. Kung mapapansin po ninyo sa buong mundo ngayon, ang mga nagpoprotesta na nagtatali ng mga sarili sa mga kumpanya, ang kanilang pinoprotesta ay mga scientifico. Ang mga nagrarally ay mga high school student. Malamang kailangan na natin tanungin ng ating sarili, ano ba talaga ang ating problema sa kalikasan, kung bakit nagkakaroon na tayo ng ganitong level ng pagkabahala ng marami po sa atin. Marami pong gabi sa inyo lahat.
Marami pong salamat, Mr. Roy Cabonegro. Let us now call on our next senatorial candidate, Dr. Mingita Padilla. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening and maraming salamat for inviting me tonight. I'm Dr. Mingita Padilla. I've been a physician for 34 years po, no? And I'm a teacher, I'm a health advocate, I'm a crusader. And talagang napilitan ako or talagang naudyok kami, no? Na maglagay ng isang doktor sa Senado. Gawa na rin ng pandemya. Alam natin na mahina ang ating sistema pangkalusugan, but it became more apparent because of the pandemic. My main platforms po are health security, food security, very important ho, no? And climate change resiliency, related ho itong lahat, they're all connected. And youth, mental health, and education. So hopefully, mabubuksan ng loob at isip ng mga tao na magluklok ng isang doktor na sa Senado para alagaan at ipaglaban lahat ito po. No? So that's all. And can I just say something? I was supposed to leave, but I can stay for a while because my sortie is at 7:30. So, pwede pa, I'll stay.
Yes pa, pwede pa. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Padilla. Now, let us call on Senatorial candidate, Mr. Jopet Season. Good evening, sir.
Hi, good evening, Shay, and good evening sa MACC. Salamat sa pagkakataong pag-imbita sa akin dito. Ako si Jopet Season, napapanood nyo sa programang Kapag Nasa Katwiran, Ipaglaban Mo. 30 taon na po kaming nagbibigay sa umpisa. Kami nagbibigay ng impormasyon at the same time entertaining the Filipino people in our program, but through time we were able to educate and inspire at patuloy namin ginagawa yon. Ako naman hindi rin bago sa serbisyo publiko, naglilingkod sa pinakamababang pamahalaan ng bansa, ang barangay. Gumagawa ng batas para sa barangay bilang kagawad ng 3 taon. Nakagawa ng 270 ordinances and resolutions bilang konsehal ng lungsod ng Quezon. Naglingkod na Assistant General Manager ng National Housing Authority for 4 years at naging presidente ng National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation for 7 years. So dinadala ko sa Senado ang aking plataforma ng pabahay, pagpapalawig ng kaalaman legal, at pagpapalakas ng barangay na sa aking palagay. Kapag pinalakas natin ang barangay, pamahalaan na pinakamalapit sa tao, marami tayong problemang mareresolve para sa ating mga mamayan. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Jopet Season. All right, so before we formally begin the forum proper, here are the mechanics. For every question, the candidate will be given a maximum of 1 minute and 30 seconds to state their answers. The first bell will ring 30 seconds before the timer stops, and the second bell will ring when the time is up. The panelists may make follow-up questions to which the candidate will have a maximum of 30 seconds to answer. For the answers to the follow-up questions, the first bell will ring 10 seconds before the timer stops, and the second bell will ring when the time is up. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you our panelists. Our first panelist, he is the current president of the Kataas-Taasang Sanggunian ng mga Mag-aaral, the Supreme Student Council of the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. He is also the Education Service Director of the Youth Advocators Productive Integrated Service and the chairperson of the Social Relations Committee of Iligan Youth Mental Health Advocates, and a board member of the Federation of MSU Supreme Council, FEMSOSCO. Our first panelist, Mr. Hans Jude Ambalong. A virtual applause, please.
Thank you, Ma'am Shai. Good evening, everyone.
Our second panelist, he was a former editor-in-chief of the Momentum Publications. Not only did he graduate with honors, but he also received excellence awards in communication and leadership from Parañaque Science High School. Now, he is a scholar and a Dean's Lister of the Ateneo de Manila University, currently studying AV Management Economics. Aside from being the co-founder of the Hearing Heart Foundation, he is also currently serving as the Deputy for Advocacy Formation at Ateneo Gabay and as the area leader for Parañaque City for the Ateneans for Voters Education. Our second panelist, Mr. Josea Encarnacion.
Good evening, everyone, and it's an honor to be here tonight, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you, candidates.
Our third panelist is a second-year business management student of De La Salle University, Manila. He is a member of the premier socio-political party in De La Salle University, Manila, and member of De La Salle Days with the Lord. Our next panelist, Mr. Ulysses Xavier Rigala.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our final panelist is a former senator of the Kataas-Taasang Sanggunian ng Mag-aaral ng MSU-IIT. He is a recipient of the 2013 Institute Leadership Award of MSU-IIT. He is the past vice president of MSU College of Medicine Student Council and the charter president of Rotaract Club of Iligan. He is also the past Assistant District Rotaract Representative of Zone 2, Rotary International District 3870. He is a graduate of BS Biology, major in General Biology in 2013, and is a graduate of Doctor of Medicine at Mindanao State University College of Medicine. Currently, a postgraduate intern of Northern Mindanao Medical Center. Currently, the International Service Director of Rotaract Club of Iligan. Our final panelist, Mr. John Michael Ermac.
Thank you, Ma'am Shai. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our aspiring senators. And I am too excited for this evening for regarding with their answers and our questions. Thank you.
And those are our panelists for tonight's forum. Ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin the MACC MACCVERSATIONS 2022 Senatorial Forum. For the first round, the candidates will answer questions from the panelists for a maximum of 1 minute and 30 seconds. When the time is up, their respective microphone will be automatically muted by our technical team. Moreover, after the allotted time to answer the given question, our panelists may do a follow-up questions and the candidate will be given 30 seconds to answer. Now, the order of speakers for this round. First, we have Attorney Agnes Bailen, followed by Mr. Roy Cabonegro, Dr. Mingita Padilla, and Mr. Jopet Sisa. The topics that we tackle on the first session will be on environment, violent extremism, and health. For the first question, the question will be coming from panelist Mr. Michael Ermac. Sir?
Thank you. Thank you to our moderator. Okay, and also once again, good evening to our aspiring senators. Good evening, gentlemen and lady. This question is about the topic on environment. So what policies, programs, or laws can you create in order to protect our country from the adverse effects of climate change? Note that if we take data into account, smaller countries suffer from the effects of pollution due to countries with the largest global emission of carbon.
May we start from Attorney Agnes Bailen.
Yes, good evening. The first thing that we should do is to really use clean, renewable energy sources. Right now, there is a move really to remove fossil fuels, coal, and other dirty energy sources. Unfortunately, our government, instead of listening to our environmentalists, decided to invest in coal, and we know naman na wala talaga tayong coal sa Pilipinas, but we import it and we have been applying this. But there are other sources of energies in the Philippines. Previously, in various administrations, we already use geothermal power plant. We also used hydro plants, and then we also rely on biogas and those other stuff. Several decades ago, unfortunately, we seem to have lost the technology and the will to implement so that we can source other alternative sources of energy. So given that we are many senatorials who are really pro climate change, hopefully when we are elected, we can bring about and come up with a more environmental friendly energy program for the Philippines. Secondly, we also have to ensure that the indigenous people will be included, because the indigenous people since several centuries are the one who were really taking care of the environment, because they know without the environment, they cannot live without the environment. However, with the onslaught of Western technology and Western education, we seem to have neglected the traditional knowledge that we can get from these indigenous people. So we must ensure that they are included in national development. Now, we also have other solid waste management, and then we also have to ensure that women are also included in climate change, because recent technology has shown, or recent data has shown, that women are the ones who really suffer the most from climate change. So they should be also be included. Also, we have to ensure that MSMEs, the small businesses, will also be included, because the need for more energy comes really from big corporations. That's why perhaps we have to review again whether there's really a need to go for big corporations, or we really need to give more power and support to MSME that data show constitute 98% of the enterprises here in the Philippines. Um, so we also have to ensure that our rivers, bodies of water, will also be protected, and also the forest. There must be a reforestation, and then in the DNR, we have to give more protection to those people who are really taking care of our forests. Um, I think in this administration there were several environmental uh, workers from DNR who were killed. However, the perpetrators, those who killed them, have not really been brought to justice. So I think we really need to ensure that they should be protected.
Okay, thank you very much, Attorney Bailen. I think your time is up. Okay, now for the panelists, you may now do a follow-up questions if you have any. Just let me see your raised hand button. Okay, so we have a follow-up question from panelist Hosea Encarnacion. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Attorney Belen. Thank you for your answer on climate action. I really applaud the breadth of your answer, how you identify the issues that we're facing as a country affected by climate change. But I'd like to ask a follow-up question regarding specific legislations that you would propose, in addition to what we already have here in the Philippine legislature. As a future senator, what specific laws would you want to propose in order to address the issue of climate change and its horrendous effect on the Philippine climate? As we've seen the effects of Yolanda and Ondoy, these are disproportionate as compared to the other typhoons. But we are not the largest emitters of carbon, but we're the ones most affected. How would you, as a senator, legislate or propose policy to improve this?
So I think we should really ensure that our foreign affairs will really protect our interests. As you have mentioned, Hosea, we are far below the 1.5% greenhouse emission. However, we are the ones who are really badly affected. In fact, we are in the top 3 disaster countries that are really affected by disasters because of our position. Now there's really a need for our policymakers to ensure that our problem here will be communicated to the international community, because this environmental problem cannot really be solved by Filipinos. It takes a global effort, because as we have seen, the exploitation of our resources, the deforestation, the mining abuse in the Philippines stems because of the unequal relationship done to us by our supposedly allies, but it turned out that it's really for their benefit. So I think there is a really need to ensure that those who have been industrialized, those states that have been industrialized for several centuries before, should compensate those people or those states right now who are suffering the most from climate disasters.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney Bailen. All right, so do we have some more follow-up question from the panel, or shall we move on to the next?
Yes, ma'am. One last, I'm sorry.
All right,
Thank you for specifying the need to communicate with the international community regarding the effects of climate change on the Philippines. And you also said that the states who have done the most damage should be held accountable. Ma'am, the Philippines ratified the Paris Climate Agreement within Duterte's administration. And yet he was quoted to say that the Philippines should not honor this. How would you work around this if ever you would be elected as senator? How can we hold states accountable if we want them to act in our best interests as a small nation? How can we hold them accountable, ma'am? Sorry, ma'am, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now? I think the president already said initially that he did not believe in climate change, the problems of climate change. But I think a few weeks ago, he issued a statement that he now believes that there is really a climate change problem. So I think with this position, so I think the state right now, especially our representatives, the different embassies and also in our representation in multilateral agreements can really push forth, because the prime architect talaga of our foreign relations is really the president. So I think because of this statement, so the government now, the Philippine government now, can really push strongly to promote the interests of the Philippines. Thank you, Hosea.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you po. No
All
further
right.
question.
Okay, thank you so much, panelist Hosea Encarnacion and also to Attorney Agnes Bailen. Okay, so if there are no more follow-up questions for attorney, let's move on to the next senatorial candidate to answer the same question. Let us call on Mr. Roy Cabonegro, sir.
Ang usapin po ng pagbago ng klima, ang Pilipinas po kasi is, while it is an early onset country, ibig sabihin, maagang nangyayari sa atin ang mga problema ng impact ng climate change. No? Tayo po ay 0.3% lamang ang ating emission. Tama, hindi ho tayo ang may kasalanan. Pero yung trend ng ating development, sooner or later, will allow us to contribute to the problem. Kasi ginagaya natin ang pamamaraan ng mga ibang bansa na siyang nagdulot ng problema. Hindi po tayo maliit na bansa. We are 110 million na ba? So it will be a very short time before we actually become a major emitter kung hindi natin babaguhin ang pamamaraan natin. Pangalawa, dahil early onset country tayo, pinakikinggan tayo sa global discussion. Dahil nakikita ng mga ibang bansa ang mangyayari sa kanila ng mas maaga dito kaysa sa ibang bahagi ng mundo. Kung tayo ay nagsasalita sa climate justice, ay nakakatulong tayo upang itulong itong mga usapin ng loss and damage at yung deep cut sa emission, etc. Ang problema po natin ay mahina po ang ating moral ascendancy. Pagdating sa pagsasalita dito, kailangan natin pong emission reduction target, bagamat 75% yan ang ating kinocommit, mataas po yan, deep cut po yan, pero 98% po nito ay conditional. Ang ibig sabihin, nakabatay sa suporta sa iba. Hindi talaga tayo nagko-commit on our own na tayo ay mag-deep cuts. No? Only 2 to 3% is unconditional. Ang 98% is conditional na mga commitment. Ibig sabihin, kahipokrituhan ho ito dahil hindi talaga tayo tunay na nagdi-deep cuts. Halimbawa na lang ang ating renewable energy plan, ay ang target po nito ay 35% at by 30-35, tinatarget po nito na nasa 35% lang tayo by 2030 pala, at by 2040 ay nasa 50% lamang. Ibig sabihin, we have 10 years until 25th renewable energy. Gayong nag-commit tayo sa Paris Climate Agreement ng zero emission tulad ng ibang mga bansa rin by 2050. Hindi po kakayanin ng ating bansa na mag-shift to renewable energy ng 50% in just 10 years. Kung kaya't ang ating targeting sa renewable energy ay sadyang napakababa. Kailangan po nating mas mataas na targeting, no? Kalahati po ng ating emission ay galing sa energy. At ang 60% po ng ating enerhiya ay galing sa coal-fired power plant. 22 power plants po yan ng coal at may papasok pang 28. Hindi ho natin binabawasan ng ating coal-fired power plants. Paano po tayo makaka-reach ng 100% renewable? Ang malaking bahagi po nito ay siyempre ang kakulangan ng ating polisiya that will allow the state to really intervene. Dahil karamihan po ng ating mga polisiya, even sa environment, ay patungo sa privatization. Kaya malaki.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Roy. Our time is up for your answer. Okay, so may I ask again our panelists if you have further follow-up question, please?
Ayun. Thank you, Ma'am Shay.
Okay,
Thank
go
you.
ahead, Sir Masaya.
Thank you, Mr. Cabonegro. When you introduced yourself, I was pleased to hear that you're a climate and environment advocate po. And siguro po one question that I have for you is the ongoing debate on shifting to renewable energies is that the burden of shifting should not fall on third world countries because, as you said, we are not the largest emitters of greenhouse gases and we barely contribute to the global emissions. And the argument stands that coal and other non-renewables are cheaper than renewable energies. Yes, we have developing technologies, but as a developing nation that can barely get out appropriations or funds for public infrastructure, wouldn't you think it would be very expensive for us to fully convert to renewable energies by 2030? By 2040, 50%. It would be difficult, yes, sir. But how do you suggest we balance the shifting to renewable energies with the sustainable development of our country? Because if it's not feasible to shift into new renewables because of the expense, would that really be an option for our climate and our environment, specifically in the Philippines, sir? Sorry, you're muted po.
Napakalimitado nitong ating format na napakaiksi ng panahon ng pagsagot, ano?
I think we lost the connection of Sir Roy Cabonegro. Okay, so I think there's a connection issue on the end of Mr. Roy Cabonegro. So I think we have to move on to the next candidate to answer the same question. May we call on Dr. Mingita Padilla? Doctor?
Okay, thank you. Among my platforms of government, I climate change resiliency and climate justice. If you look at my website, one of the solutions to climate change is staring at us in the face, and that is work from home. We can continue whenever we can. Remember, nung nag-work from home tayo during the pandemic, the pollution index was so low and the air was so good. We learned many things from the pandemic. One of them was we can work from home. And when we can, we should encourage that. Don't force people to use gasoline, to pay pamasahe, okay? Tapos gas emissions, no? If we can do it from home, that's one, no? We have to, of course, everyone was saying alternative sources of energy, but it's expensive. That's where climate justice comes in. We are part of the Paris Accord, and there's a commitment of $100 billion for us, for countries like us. We have to demand this. And how do we get this? Huh? We haven't been really seriously demanding this. And I want to use our youth, because among the top 10 countries affected by climate change, the Philippines is one of the most affected. The Philippines is one of number 2. Japan is number 1. And we have Canada, and we also have Germany. We have some rich nations affected. Let's use the youth, the world, to demand this, because it is your future. Okay, you will be most passionate about it. And I think when the youth gets together, and we can make it a policy to organize our own youth, like a world movement for climate justice, because that's how we're going to get the money to fund alternative energy, to fund our changing our public transportation. We cannot put the burden on the people. The public transportation vehicle owners, no? So we have to find a way to get that money to us, because as all of you have said, we're only emitting 0.3% of the greenhouse gases, but we're the most affected. Now, for climate change resiliency, well, there are many other things, like we have to encourage planting mangroves, no? It protects us, at the same time it can give us food. We have to have tougher laws on deforestation. We have to be very tough on that, no? And then we can also protect ourselves from food.
All right. Thank you so much, Doc. Our time is up. Okay. Now, may I ask the panelists if they have any further follow-up question for Dr. Padilla? Kindly unmute yourselves if you have any. And if there is, okay, another one from panelist Hosea. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Padilla, for your insight regarding climate justice. Would you say that the work from home setup would be sufficient to offset our carbon emissions? And another question regarding a different environment, but in that same context, would be the mental health environment as posed by the work from home and uh, distance learning setups imposed by the pandemic. Yes, they may have reduced the emissions on our streets, but is this sufficient? And yes, yun po muna.
First of all, it's not enough. It's one of the things we can do, okay? Because we have to make use of what we learned. And we're talking about adults working like BPOs, call centers. I'm not talking about students. Students have to go to school. It's a different thing altogether. And mental health is one of my advocacies as well. But it's all related, but it's not the same as iba yung work from home sa mga patanda na, mga adults, at hindi sa estudyante. Okay? So, yun lang, no? I think it's 30 seconds. No? So, it's a different thing. It's not sufficient. It's only one of the tools.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, last po, before I go back to Mr. Cabonegro, because he is rejoined already. You stated a policy regarding organizing youth to assemble for climate justice.
Yes.
Would this have Senate oversight, congressional oversight, or would this exist entirely outside of the government structure? And how would we institute this po?
Because the Senate is also in charge of treaties, no? I think we have to elevate climate justice to the level of a treaty, perhaps, no? To organize the countries that are most affected by climate change to really have a voice and demand what they have actually agreed upon in the Paris Accord. Nobody's taking it seriously. But I think the youth, if you have some law, then you have funding. If you don't have a law, you have no funding. So it will help to have a law regarding this. No, let's institutionalize climate justice and demand it as the nation most affected by climate change.
Thank you,
All right.
Dr. Padilla.
Thank you so much, Dr. Padilla. Okay, I think Mr. Roy Cabonegro has already been in the Zoom room again. So do we have the follow-up question for him? So we will give him a chance to answer the follow-up question. Go ahead, Sir Hosea.
Ayun, just to recap, the follow-up question was regarding the realistic premise of us shifting to renewable energy. It may be good for our climate, but as you said, we are one of the lowest emitters of greenhouse gases. And as a developing nation, we would need these non-renewables at a cheap price in order to fund our growing industries and our development. How would you say, sir, would we balance sustainable development and climate action if it's very expensive to shift to renewable resources of energy?
Coal is not cheap, ano? Kasi yung externalities nito sa pollution is ano yun? Wait lang. May narinig ako. Sandali lang ha. Sorry, may narinig po akong ibang sound na lumalabas. What I'm saying is that yung coal is not really inexpensive because if you consider the externalities like yung epekto nito sa pollution, pag sinama mo po ang health cost ng coal, hindi lamang sa mga surrounding community, pero in a broader context kasi nakakaabot yan sa malayong lugar, hindi po mura ang coal. Pangalawa, this is a very, hindi po tayo energy secure sa coal dahil hindi po tayo nagpo-produce ng sarili nating panggatong sa ating coal. Binibili po natin ang ating coal sa ibang bansa. So kung sila ay tumigil sa pagbenta sa atin, then nagkakagipitan din dahil sa climate change, we will be in a very bad situation, no? So hindi po ito usapin ng dahil tayo ay hindi primary emitter, hindi na natin kailangan gawin. Ang buong mundo ay naglilipat na from coal to renewable. Kung ang
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Roy. Our time is up for the follow-up question. Okay, shall we now proceed to the next candidate, or do we have some more follow-up questions from the panelists? Okay, so I see no raised virtual hand. Let us now call on senatorial candidate Mr. Jobert Season. Sir?
Yeah, hi, Shay. Thank you for the question. Regarding solid waste management, I think the solution there would be to tap the basic government of our country, which are the barangays. We have to go house to house, and for us to do that, we have to tap the basic government, the barangays. If we are to reduce, reuse, recycle solid waste, then we have to educate the individual households, and we can do it through the barangays. Yeah, alternative source of energy may be expensive, but we can partner with foreign corporations and learn from what other countries have been doing, and probably use the land as our participation, and invite countries and foreign corporations to participate. I agree that natutunan ko ito kila Roy, kila Dr. Padilla, 0.3% ang ating global emission sa mundo, at ang malaki ay yung ibang countries. So we have to enter into treaties with the UN in order to enforce and probably mandate them to reduce their emissions. And that is the duty of the senator, of the Senate, to approve treaties, initiate treaties for the country. So yeah, we have to fight that in the UN Council and through treaties. The other one I learned also from Mr. Cabonegres on the new communities. We have to build housing so that the communities will be protected from the adverse effects of climate change. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Jopet Season. Now for our panelists for their follow-up questions, please. Kindly raise your hand virtually, if there are any. Okay, so I see there are none. Okay. Sir Hosea, okay, go ahead. Sir Hosea, go ahead for your follow-up question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Season, for your inspired answer. I like where you pointed out that the climate action, should start within our basic government unit, the barangay. And it's really an issue of behavior and educating the masses of how each and every one of us could help. And yes, that's a very important step. But shouldn't we focus more on the larger contributors for greenhouse gases in the Philippines specifically? So the transport sector, the industry sector, these are companies that, do you think that we should hold them accountable and mandate that they reduce carbon emissions in their specific fields, such as concrete production, transportation, industry, manufacturing? Yes, it would be good to start from the barangay, but what do you think we should do about the big players that contribute a lot to the carbon emissions here, specifically in our country?
Yeah, although our contribution is only 0.3%, we still have to exert effort to reduce emission in our country. And I think that was significantly answered also by Dr. Mingita, when we have to learn from our experience during the pandemic. We have already established bike lanes, so we can use bicycles, reduce the gas emissions, and the use of motor vehicles. We can reduce that so that we can also contribute in the reduction of these emissions. If I may point out also, you were talking a while ago about the renewable energy plan. Our laws have constricted the influx of these renewable energies. We have provided them with tax incentives, but I think we can still relax these laws so that we can increase the influx of renewable energies, so that the target of 50% by 2040 can be reduced to 2030.
All right, thank you so much, Sir Jopet Season, for that answer. Okay, do we have some more follow-up questions from the panelists? I think there are none, so let's now have the audience time or the guest time. So we have We will give our audience in the Zoom room the chance to ask their question, their follow-up question as well to our senatorial candidate. So I will be checking the chat panel. If you have any question from our guests and audience, you may just type them on the chat panel, or you may virtually raise your hand. Okay? All right. So I'm not seeing anything on the chat panel. How about a virtual raise of hand? Okay, there are none. All right, so, okay. So there are no questions coming from our audience in the Zoom room. So thank you very much to our panelists and to our senatorial candidates for the answer and for the question as well for the first question. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. For the second question, it will be coming from panelist Mr. Hans Ambalong. And now the first one to answer is Mr. Roy Cabonegro. Go ahead, Mr. Hans Ambalong, for your next question.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Shai. As well as thank you to all of our senatorial candidates for a very insightful discussion on the issue on environment, specifically on how do we battle the issue that our country is very much affected because of the emission of these bigger countries compared to us. Now, as of this moment, we'd like to hear your insights on the topic violent extremism. So the persistent presence of violent extremists in Mindanao poses further threats of radicalization and recruitment to illegal armed groups among young people. The merge of conflicts and development challenges in Mindanao intensifies the impact on the Filipino youth, indigenous communities, and internally displaced people. So the Philippine government has addressed these issues through the adoption of the Philippine Youth Development Plan of 2017 to 2022, and through the reform of the Sangguniang Kabataan. However, these national initiatives may not yet be sufficiently implemented at the regional and local levels. So the question goes like this: how can you ensure that our youth are actively engaged in peace-building programs and initiatives? And in the long term, how can we ensure sustainable development in Mindanao so we can avoid extremism together?
Go ahead, Sir Roy. You may answer the question.
Okay. Well, ang usapin po ng extremism, no, na violent extremism sa Mindanao in particular, guys, tutok natin sa Mindanao. Ang sabi nila 6 out of 10 sa mga nag-NPA ay lumad. Hindi po ito pwedeng maihiwalay sa sektor lang ng kabataan dahil ang mga lumad ay gumagalaw sa konteksto ng kanilang community, no? Kanilang ancestral domain at kanilang mga tribo. Ang katotohanan po niyan ay marami pong pinapasok na mga giyera, away sa loob ng mga ancestral domain na hindi naman po nila giyera at away. So ang mahalaga po dito ay ang pagdedeklara ng peace zone sa loob ng ancestral domain at ang isang malakas na effort upang lahat ng mga armadong grupo, rebelde man o gobyerno, ay umalis dito sa mga ancestral domain dahil hindi po nila ito giyera. Ang mga gerang ito ang nagdi-divide sa kanilang mga pamilya. Ang una-unang nare-recruit ay ang mga kabataan. Hindi po ito mahanap sa mga youth development program natin. Ang problema po ay nasa loob kung paano natin sinusuportahan ang ating mga ancestral domain at kung paano natin ito tinatrato bilang free space for all this violence. Ang peace zone na tinatawag ay madali pong gawin sa bahagi ng gobyerno. Order lang po yan ng presidente. Lahat ng armadong grupo ng gobyerno, state agent, labas. Ang usapin naman ng mga rebelde ay kailangang ipasok sa peace negotiation. Kung kaya't dapat all-out peace po tayo sa negosasyon, ilagay yan sa kondisyon upang umalis sila lahat sa ancestral domain. At ating pong suportahan ang ating mga ancestral domain dahil ang ugat po ng extremism ay ang kahirapan at ang kawalan ng mga oportunidad. Pag nagkaroon po ng development sa mga lugar, ay nawawala po ang mga extreme itong mga extremism na ito. Ang mga
All right, Sir Roy, thank you so much po. Our time is up. Okay, thank you for that answer. Now, may I request the member of the panel, if you have any further questions, follow-up question for Mr. Roy Cabonegro for this particular question. Okay, I recognize our panelist, John Michael Ermac. Sir, go ahead. Please unmute
Yes.
yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening again, Sir Roy. So, yes, I like the idea regarding what you have shared regarding with our LUMADs or our marginalized sectors, I can say. So my question is like, do you have any specific programs or plans to act on this issue? And how can you develop it in that area?
Well, ulitin ko, no, dahil napakalimitado nitong format kasi ninyo ng time, ang hirap mag-articulate, no? Ang una po ay dapat meron talagang effort for building peace zones. Ulitin ko, madaling gawin sa bahagi ng gobyerno. Aalisin lang nila, isang utos lang. Sa bahagi ng rebelde, kailangan ilagay siya sa peace negotiation na mga kondisyon. Pero kulang po yan. Dahil hanggat walang kaunlaran sa loob ng mga ancestral domain, unang-una, wala dyan ang mga katutubo dahil pinapaalis sila. Ako galing lang sa Bukidnon, maaring nabalitaan nyo sa news, no? Pinagbabaril kami nung kami tinulungan naming makapasok mga Manobo sa kanilang kalupaan na inagaw ng isang plantation na ang project manager ay mayor mismo ng town. So marami pong ganyang problema. Ang pinakamabigat dyan ay hindi ho natin pinupondohan ang development plan ng mga katutubo. Hindi katulad ng mga LGU na ating pinopondohan. Wala pong pinagkaiba ang isang LGU sa isang ancestral domain. Parehong may teritoryo, parehong Pilipino, parehong may plano. Bakit hindi automatic ang pagpopondo sa mga ancestral domain? Bakit kailangan silang manlimos? Pilipino din sila. Hanggat walang kaunlaran ang nasa loob ng ancestral domain, yan ay breeding ground for rebellion and other extremism, no? Bigyan ho natin ng kaunlaran ang loob ng ancestral domain sa loob ng kanilang right to self-determination. Kailangan pong mabawi ang lahat ng ancestral domain. Not a single CADT has been issued in this administration over the past 6 years. Yan ho ba ang ating pag-recognize sa kanilang ancestral domain? Not a single one. Tandaan po natin yon. 6 years, zero. Zero performance sa pag-recognize ng kanilang mga ancestral domain.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Roy Cabonegro. Do we have any other follow-up questions from our panelists? Okay. All right, si Sir Hosea, ayan. Go, sir. Go ahead.
Ayun po. Thank you, Sir Roy, na i-highlight niyo po yung pagkikilala ng mga ancestral domain ng ating mga kasamang nasa Mindanao at yung kahalagahan ng pagpapaunlad ng mga pangangailangan nila, specifically doon po sa Mindanao. Question ko po, sir, ano po ang tingin nyo ang problema kung bakit napakabagal ng pag-unlad specifically sa mga far-flung areas natin, sir? At bakit ang Mindanao ay parating na pag-iiwanan?
Well, kung ang pag-uusapan natin sa ancestral domain, may conflict of interest kasi, no? Dahil ang mga naiiwang lugar ng mga ancestral domain, yan din ang pinakamayayaman sa mga naiiwan nating komunidad. At dahil ang ating polisiya ay export-oriented sa mga resources, yan ay pinag-aagawan ng mga investment na galing sa labas. Ang problema kasi natin, hindi natin dine-develop for our own use ang ating mga resources. Ang ating mga land ay ginagamit for so much export processes. Hindi ho papaloob ang ating proseso. Kaya huwag kayong magtaka, walang development dahil papalabas lahat. Ang mining, for example, is only contributing what? 5% sa ating less than 1% sa ating ang kanilang royalty is less than 1% sa kanilang kinikita. 5% lamang ang kanilang taxes. Ibig sabihin 94% ng kanilang kita ay papalabas sa bansa. At tayo ang naiiwan ng napakaraming polusyon at pagkasira ng kalikasan dahil 5% lamang ang ating pagtatax sa mina, 1% lamang ang binibigay na royalty sa mga ancestral domain. So sadya pong hindi po maganda ang forma ng ating mga polisiya pagdating sa ating natural resources. Kaya kailangan po itong i-reclaim, i-renationalize. Hanggat hindi po natin magagawa ito, hindi po tayo makikinabang sa kaunlaran mula sa ating mga natural resources, lalong-lalo na yung mga pinakamahalaga na naiiwan sa mga ancestral domain. Tandaan po natin, ang kalupaan ng ancestral domain ay never na naging sa Estado. This is exempted from the Regalian Doctrine dahil bago pa man nabuo ang Estado, nandyan na ang mga katutubo. We can only recognize and support them for their own self-determination ng kanilang kaunlaran. Pero kung hindi natin sila susuportahan, dahil ang tingin natin sa kanila, hindi Pilipino, minsan hindi tao ang trato sa kanila, paano po mangyayari? Ang solusyon po ng marami nating problema, lalo na sa klima, ay ang ating mga ancestral domain. Dahil tulad po ng sabi ni Attorney Jopet kanina, yung sinasabi namin green communes, yan yung sagot sa climate change adaptation problem natin. At karamihan sa mga lugar na gagawing green commune might be in the ancestral domain. So kung hindi natin to aayusin in the next 5 years, in the next 2 decades, kung kailan natin kailangan itayo itong mga green communes, baka wala tayong makuhang sapat na kalupaan. Kailangan po natin tingnan ang problema ng mga indigenous people within the national context, not romanticize them for being in difficult situation. We need the ancestral domain. We need the IPs. It's not na kailangan tayong maawa sa kanila. Huwag po natin i-romanticize ang problema. Kailangan po natin ang mga kalupaan na to para sa national development. Pero sila ang may karapatan dyan. Dahil historically, napagkait sila sa sarili nilang self-determination ng kanilang kaunlaran.
Maraming salamat po, sir. Sorry po, maikli na lang po na pukaw niyo po ang aking interes, Mr. Roy. Kung maalala po natin, nung na-appoint po si Ms. Gina Lopez bilang DNR Secretary na isa pong environmental advocate, gaya niyo po, saglit lang po siyang nailuklok dahil nagkaroon po ng kontrobersiya sa pagpapasara niya ng mga mining operations dito sa ating bansa. Paano po, halimbawa po, pala rin po kayo bilang senador, paano niyo po masisiguro na pakikinggan po tayo, kayo po ng estado natin at susunod tayo sa pagpapaayos ng ganitong kalagayan ng kalikasan? At yun, sir, paano po yun? Paano ba yun, sir?
Dihado po sa kasalukuyang forma ng Kongreso ang mga ganitong uri ng policy. Kasi karamihan ng nasa Kongreso, yung mga nandyan na o papasok pa, ay mga vested interest na nakataya sa mga malalaking kampanya ng mga bilyonaryo. Lagi po talagang dihado ang mga katulad namin. Pero hindi lamang po ang pagsasabatas sa pamamagitan ng Kongreso ang paraan ng paggawa ng batas. Meron po tayong People's Initiative kung saan ang tao mismo ang gagawa ng batas. Lokal man o nasyonal. Ang Kongreso ay renationalisasyon ng ating mga natural resources at ang ating mga public utility ng klima. Kailangan po natin ngayon, kailangan pong magparaya ang mga mayayaman dahil nasa kanila po ang konsentrasyon ng yaman. Kaya po tayo mahirap ay dahil sa kanila. Kailangan po natin silang i-wealth tax, kailangan po silang magparaya. Ngayon, kung hindi madadaan sa maayos na usapan, idadaan po natin sa People's Initiative. Kung hindi pa rin madadaan dyan, huwag kayong magtaka kung marami ang magre-rebelde. Dahil ang dami na pong nahihirapan sa ganitong kalagayan. Kailangan po natin bigyan ng pagkakataon ng mapayapang paraan. Kaya ang mga pagpasok namin, tulad naming mga papasok na senador na ganito ang pananaw, ay kailangan buksan ninyo ang inyong pananaw sa ganito. Kami po hindi nang gugulo. Ang amin lang po, nasa emergency po tayo ng klima. Kailangan nating panghawakan ang ating mga natural resources na public utility. Hindi po panahon ngayon ng sobrang saksakan ng daming privatisasyon. Panahon lang ho ngayon ng renationalisasyon ng ating mga resources. We have to reclaim our natural patrimony.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
All right, thank you so much, Sir Roy Cabonegro and Sir Josea. So this is to inform everybody that the organizer has decided that the time constraint will be removed in order for all the candidates to express themselves and to deliver their answers properly and even better. No? So we are now removing the time constraint. So you may take your time in answering your questions and in delivering your platforms or your plans for the election. Okay, so let's now move on to to the next candidate. Let's hear from Dr. Mingita Padilla. Doctor?
Sandali lang po, I'll just open my, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, maraming salamat po, no? Actually, agree ako sa mga problema indigenous people, pero ang gutom ho is not limited to indigenous people. Ang gutom ho ay gutom kung mahirap ang buhay. No? And I work with a lot of indigenous people, and nakausap ko sila. First of all, we have an IPRA law. We have Indigenous Peoples Rights Act, 1997. It was supposedly the most progressive law, no? Kaya lang, ang problema ngayon, sa hierarchy ng mga batas, napakababa niya. Kung minsan, yung DENR at yung IPRA hindi nagkakasundo, no? And then the people don't get to really, and then we have your Indigenous Philippine Council or Commission for Indigenous People, may pera sila natatanggap from other countries, pero hindi nararamdaman ng mga groups. It doesn't go to them. So one is, we have to look into that oversight ho, ipapatawag ho natin yung mga groups. As a legislator, you have to have an oversight. What is happening to this law? 1997 pa ho, it's not being implemented. There are so many loopholes that have to be fixed. That's one. But then, aside from that ho, gutom ho talaga ang gutom. No? We have now the NTFL Act. I know it's controversial, but it can be legislated and called something else. Kasi ho, naglilibot ako sa buong Pilipinas, nakikita ko naman ho na the local governments want this kind of socio-economic development. Kasi okay, you have armed struggle, and then but the people, if you give them livelihood, if you give them socio-economic development, they'll be reintegrated into society. And I'm not talking about just about indigenous people. I'm talking about Filipinos in general. No, we've seen it in Zamboanga, Sibugay, in Escalante, in lahat ng pinuntahan ho namin. There has to be a plan. You cannot just disarm them and leave them the same way. That's very important, no? And the BRAVE, the budget reform agenda for village empowerment. That's one of our advocacies, one of our platforms. We can amend the way the budget is prepared. Because right now, nangyayari po, ang mga it's dictated upon, yung mga projects, it's being dictated upon by what they call Imperial Manila. Alam ko yon, no? Hindi naman nila nalalaman, ano ba talaga kinakailangan o kailangan dun sa baba? So what has to happen is this, no? We have to increase, we can actually increase the amounts that we're giving to each barangay, each province, and each city by as much as 1 billion per province, 100 million per city, and 5 million per barangay per year. Base ho ito sa budget na hindi nagagamit. And a lot of it, there's unused, meron din corruption, 700 billion in corruption, 360 billion in unused. Okay, give that money to the locals. Tapos you get them involved in the planning. This is all part of the law or the budget reforms we're going to do if magpalain po tayo, no? For example, ito, si Mayor, alam niya naman ang kailangan niya ay mga new roads, hindi widening pero talagang tamang road, or else they need irrigation projects or patubig, no, para sa mga communities or irrigation for the farmers. Tapos sasabihin ng isang congressman dito, hindi, ang project mo dapat multi-purpose hall. Nangyayari. So sasabihin ni Mayor, ay hindi ko kailangan ng multi-purpose hall, meron na kami. Pero sasabihin ng congressman from Manila or from the central government is, no, yan ang project ninyo. It cannot be like that anymore. Stop na. Let's stop this. No? It should come from below. This proposal should come from below. The planning should come from the community, from the village. And I think if you do that, you'll end up na yung mga tao, yung urban poor mababawasan kasi pupunta na sila doon, magkakatrabaho sila. Ang dami namin narinig na ganito. So this is I think this is how we should look at budgeting now, short of federalism. Kasi federalism, it's one of the possibilities, di ba? Pero, short of that, kunyari matatagalan, let's reform the way we plan our budget. Huh? And those are just some of the possible things that we can do to help para matapos na itong napapabayaan. We have to give you more rights and more say in what projects you really need for your locale. And we should respect that. We should respect that. Part of the budgeting process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Padilla. This time, let us ask our panelists for their follow-up questions. Okay, let's have panelist John, Michael, or Mac. Sir, go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, Ma. Good evening, Doc. Okay, so I like the idea. Yes, po. I like the idea that you mentioned about the 1997 Indigenous People Act. So you have mentioned, you elaborated under this act. So my question is regarding with the budgeting. So do you think is there a problem of the budget, or there is a problem on the proper appropriation of fund? So that's my first question po. And yes po, my second question is, so if you intend to revise or to reform this 1997 Indigenous People Act, do you have in mind, or what do you think or ano ba ang mas maganda para sa ating lahat? And in the long term, how can we ensure a sustainable development in Mindanao so that we can avoid this extremism altogether?
Okay.
Thank you po.
Okay. There's many problems about the budget, no? Sometimes our budget, na, as I said, is centered, no? It's what happens is this, they put a ceiling. Kunyari, okay, itong pinakamalaking amount na kailangan natin, kahit walang proyekto. So dapat, zero-based budgeting. So now, for example, the ideal will be this. So it's a process of budgeting in itself has to be revisited. Okay? Kasi nangyayari, okay, you should spend 10 billion, for example. Kahit wala ka pang proyekto, naghahanap ka ng magagawa with that 10 billion, kahit hindi naman kailangan or it's wrong. So, and then ang nangyayari, yung mga barangay, yung mga mayors, pupunta na yan sa Manila, may dala-dala mga portfolio, naglilibos ng budget, hindi ganon. Ang dapat mangyari is in our plan is that we increase the budget for the localities, and they have a predictable increase sa budget, and they'll tell them, okay, next year you're going to receive this much. Magplano na kayo. Yung development council mismo ninyo magpaplano, i-present ninyo, pero yung budget release will be based on your plan. Hindi yung basta mag-release na walang plano. Kaya mali ang ating budgeting process. That's one. So there's so much wasted money. There's so much money that doesn't get used. It goes back to the treasury or it is misused. Okay. Number two, yung IPRA law, no? Okay, I have been dialoguing with indigenous people even in Luzon, no? And then ang problema kasi in the hierarchy of laws na mababa yung IPRA. So pag nag-aaway yung IPRA, yung Philippine Commission for Indigenous People and then the DENR, who gets follow the DENR, and sometimes iba yung DENR na sinasabi dun sa council. Hindi sila nagkakatugma. We have to fix the process. I would like to call an oversight, a hearing, no, to see how is this law being implemented. How come the indigenous people since 1997 are still like that? Alam ko, there's another part of the law that says full parang informed consent, prior informed consent. Ang ibig sabihin nito, bago ko, kunyari, you have a ancestral land, before you can appropriate that land and use it for commercial or something, there must be prior informed consent galing sa tribe, di ba? That's also another source of problem. Kaya nagkakapatayan kasi kuminsan they bribe one of the sectors of the tribe, and then or else they don't tell them everything. Then they'll agree. Tapos one sector ayaw. So yan, violence na yan. Because kulang ho ng proseso. The implementing rules and regulations are vague, no? So we have to get to the bottom of this. Why is it like that? No, and another thing, I was told by the indigenous people themselves, may pera ho yung Philippine Commission for Indigenous People. They get funds from abroad, from UNESCO, from USAID, and this funding is supposed to go to the indigenous people's groups. But often, so I want to ask them, nasaan yung pera? Paano yung ginastos yung pera? Magkano napunta na dito sa Philippine Commission for Indigenous People? At magkano nabigay nyo? And what projects were used? So, and we have to also organize the indigenous people because who are you going to deal with? Para walang kaguluhan. This is all part of the law that we have to actually revisit. No? So in paper, it's progressive. Pero in actuality, sa practice, hindi ko nagagawa. Hindi ko nagbe-benefit. And I agree, we have to integrate them into society. Let them make the most of their land. Abroad, you have in Canada, in Connecticut, many of the indigenous tribes, they're very wealthy, because their land has been used in such a way that they can earn from it. And we should do that, no? Earn from it, yet preserve their identity, because the indigenous people are also are linked to the past. But let's not only talk about indigenous, let's talk about development in general. So the budget reform can actually jumpstart development in areas like Mindanao. You know, that's specific. It's very specific.
Thank you, ma'am.
May I say something? Because I need to go on a sortie. I wish I could stay, but I'm we're campaigning, and I'm supposed to be somewhere now. But I want to just say thank you for allowing me this time to address you. I would have wanted to stay, but can I just say something before I go? Unless there's another question.
Or
Is there a follow-up question, or can I say something before I go?
Yes, go ahead, Doc.
No, I just wanted to say na kayo ho, your youth, kabataan kayo, your youth. No? And I think yung mga senatorial balls na nandito ngayon, mga progressive thinkers, no? We're not the usual, we think outside the box, I believe so. That's why you also invited us, no? And as young people, I see myself in you. At one time, we were all young. We were dreamers. And I want you to tell you, continue to dream, no? And you vote for candidates who will power your dreams, but temper it with reality, and not shoot it down, not shoot down your dreams, no, but encourage you. And the future is yours. Ang marami sa amin dito hindi politiko, pero tumatakbo kami kasi nakikita namin na ang matindi pangangailangan, especially for you. You will inherit this earth. And whatever we leave behind now, if we cannot fix it now, it's our fault also. So we have to do something now. And that's ako naiiyak ako, but this is why we're running. I think everybody here feels the same way. No? We don't, this is not our comfort zone. We are not politicians, but there's a call and a need for leaders to help the youth for the future as well. So we have to start now. Yan po, and yun lang po. I have to go. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Padilla, for sharing your time with us. And maybe we can invite you again in our future Senatorial forum. All right. Okay, so let's move on to our next senatorial candidate to answer the same question. Let us call on Mr. Jopet Season, sir.
Yeah, Shai, thank you. Yeah, to answer the question on extremism, the way to peace is peace. It's not really violence. So we have to address the needs of the people who are really rebelling against the government. Sometimes nadinig ninyo kay Roy, lumalaban dahil na-frustrate sa gobyerno. At kung minsan gobyerno yung nangaapak sa kanila. So kailangan naman natin siguro yung gobyernong masasandalan at kailangan natin ng mga halal na individual na talaga naman ang iniisip yung mamamayan. So iba-iba ang solusyon sa iba-ibang rehiyon ng bansa. Minsan ang sinasabi namin, gutom. So kailangan natin pagandahin ang negosyo. Kapag pagagandahin ang negosyo, kailangan ang gobyerno predictable, consistent. Para yung mga investors, kapag alam na ito ang policies, madali silang mag-i-invest, magtitiwala sa gobyerno. In this case, dito sa pinag-uusapan natin, nakikita ko iba eh. Dahil ang pinag-uusapan, ancestral domain, lupa, ibang treatment, pagka lupa. So, kailangan narinig ko rin sa marami namin nakausap na IP, security of tenure. Kailangan once and for all, lagyan na natin ng marka ng muhon yung kanilang territory dahil diyan nag-uumpisa hindi malinaw yung muhon, kinakain na ang kumakain pa, isipin mo naman local government units, gobyerno ang kumakain dahil nga mayroong mga iniisip na ibang pagkakakitaan. So once and for all, yan naman yung iba may titulo, may technical description, yan naman ay finite. Ang lupa ay hindi naman gumagalaw, muhunan na natin at yan trabaho ng gobyerno so that once they have security of tenure, palagi ko mapapanatag ang kalooban nila at yung pag-ahon, yung negosyo, yung agrikultura, kung yan naman ay may agriculture development, ay mapapanatag. Baka nga, pagka nabigyan natin ng security of tenure, baka hindi na yan umasa sa gobyerno for agricultural development. Magkukusa sila dahil nakakasiguro sila kanila na yung lupa. So isa po yun. Yung pangalawa, yung system of government. Nung nagpunta kami sa Mindanao, nagulat ako dahil ang pinapakilala sa amin, mayor, congressman, at may mga pinakilala sa aming ministro. Dahil meron na tayo doon, Federal Parliament Form of Government, yung BARM, which was approved in 2019. Sa akin, sinusuportahan ko yun dahil ngayon nagkaroon tayo ng kahit paano katahimikan dun sa parte na yun ng Mindanao. So let us support diversity. Let us give them the opportunity to govern themselves. And this is existing. 2019, a different form of government in the Philippines, parliamentary, federal form of government. Bigyan natin ng pagkakataon, suportahan natin yung inumpisahan nila doon na BARM. And thirdly, yung nabanggit kanina ni Dr. Mingita, itong sa budget. Ay, ako po talagang yan ang aking pet peeve, itong budget na ito dahil yan ang punot dulo ng lahat ng ating problema. Ang pinaka-importanting batas na pinapasa taon-taon ay ang budget. At kung gusto mong bantayan ang korupsyon, Yan ang titingnan ninyo. Kaya ako, I have been fighting for line item budgeting para bawat sentimo ng iyong pondo mababantayan natin. We democratize it. We decentralize it para mas marami. Para kayong mga kabataan na ang gagaling ninyo sa computer, let us make our budget downloadable, user-friendly. Kayo ang magbantay, yung mga engineer natin, yung mga architects na may magaling sa figures, sila ang magbabantay. Binigyan tayo ng pagkakataon noon. May mga konsepto noon. Yan binabanggit ni Minggita, balanced budget. Ibig sabihin yan, yung iyong source of funds ay katumbas ng iyong expenses. Ang ginagawa, yung source of fund, linalakihan. So there is a portion there that is bloated. Yung bloated portion na yan ang ibibigay mo doon sa ayaw mong proyekto dahil hangin lang yan eh. So let us come up with a balanced budget na yung source of fund mo is equal to your expenses. At dati nagkaroon, maganda yung intention nung nakarang administrasyon, yung tinatawag nilang bottom-up. Bottom-up budgeting. Manggagaling sa mamamayan, manggagaling sa barangay, sa local government, yung pagpupondo. Ang problema, kinunan lang sila ng idea, kinunan sila ng project, ang nagdedesisyon sa taas pa rin. So, doon sa mga binigay nilang pagpupondo, 20% lang. Yan yung binabanggit kanina ni Dr. Mingilio. 20% lang ang ibababa. Yung 80% sila pa rin ang nagdedesisyon. So let us change. Let us reform this budget process. Truly empower the local government units, truly empower the people so that they would have a determination of where their funds should go. So yun lang po. Maraming salamat sa katanungan.
Thank you very much, Sir Jopet Season. Okay, I see a raised hand from our co-senatorial candidate, Mr. Roy Cabonegro. Sir, do you have any further question or follow-up question to Sir Jopet?
Yeah, gusto ko lang susuga ng sinabi ni attorney, no? I'm glad na yung nagkakaisa tayo ng pananaw na itong pagtuldok sa usapin ng deadline ng mga CADT sa ancestral domain, kailangan talaga lagyan ito ng deadline. Hindi pwedeng open-ended. Palagay ko, Attorney Season, ito ay dapat isang amendment sa IPRA law na maglalagay talaga tayo ng deadline dahil nagkakagulo tayo eh. Kung saan at saan ang mga boundary ng mga CADT. So dapat 1 year, 2 years, deadline na talaga yan. Isang batas talaga. Kasi kung hindi, lalo tayo magkakagulo. Kung antayin natin ng National Land Use to define that, abutin tayo ng siyam-siyam, no? Pangalawa, yung sa budget, ako'y pabor dyan. Tama yung sinasabi nila attorney at saka ni doktora kanina na talagang dapat ang alisin natin dyan, yung bottom up, kailangan palawakin. Kasi maliit lang na bahagi, 20% eh. Hindi yung buong budget ang nasa subject sa bottom up. Pangalawa, yung role ng mga legislator ay hindi para mag left and right ay mag-decide kung saan ang pondo sa project. Ginagawa na po ng mga legislator yan sa General Appropriations Act.
Okay, Sir Roy, I think we lost you. Okay, we'll get back again to Sir Roy in a while. Now let's entertain the follow-up questions from our panelists. First off, let's hear from Mr. John Michael. Sir, go ahead.
Yes, good evening again, Sir Jopet. No, I like the idea that you mentioned regarding the security of tenureship and agricultural development, which is, we know that our indigenous people is very well versed in terms of agricultural development. And also the last one that you mentioned regarding the proper budgeting was also mentioned by Doc a while ago. So my follow-up question is that how can you ensure that our youth can actively engage in these programs and initiatives po?
Well, yeah, thank you for that question. No? Alam nyo, the topics that you have been bringing up, environment, IP, ancestral domain, I get to research on that more because it is the youth, the interviews with the youth that have been encouraging us and raising these issues. So one thing we can do is keep on championing these causes para mas marami ang makikinig at mas marami ang magpa-participate. And talaga naman kailangan natin yung sigla at tapang ng kabataan na itulak tayo na bigyan ng pansin yung mga issues na yan. Pangalawa, marami tayong mga programs ng gobyerno na kailangan nating bantayan at kailangan din natin yung tapang at idealismo ng kabataan para bantayan yung mga proyekto na yan at lalong-lalo na yung pinag-uusapan natin kanina, yung budgeting. What we can do is come up with policies to have a transparent budgeting, to have a transparent government. Once it is accessible, we will rely on you to get those information, to guard our funds, and to raise your voices so that we can at least be empowered to tell government to listen to our youth.
Okay, thank you po. Thank you for trusting us, especially the youth sector.
All right, now let's hear from panelist Sir Hosea. Your follow-up question, please.
Thank you, Ma'am Shai. Thank you, Sir Sison. Yes, I could speak from experience that as a member of the Gen Z, the youngest voting population sector of our country today, this is the first election that we've truly felt empowered to participate in the social dialogues and to speak up about issues that really are important to us. And yes, we haven't been here long, but we see the injustices. We see the inequalities that perpetuate within the government because of this highly centralized and highly self-serving nature of the Philippine government, that 80% of the budget is concentrated in the central government, whereas what Dr. Padilla said earlier, the people on the ground are the ones who would know what is needed the most. Sir, I don't imagine that this policy, this decentralization of budgeting would be popular in the Senate and in Congress. As a future legislator yourself, how would you realistically pass this and let the legislature swallow this pill, so to speak, and allow us more transparency in budgeting and allow us a more realistic and more accessible system of government, sir?
Yeah. So yeah, one is we need a law in order to devolve the funding. Ang kagandahan yan, meron na tayo, meron ng desisyon ang Korte Suprema, itong Mandanas-Garcia ruling, pinalaki ang allocation sa ating mga local government units down to the barangay levels. May mga barangay na mag-increase ng 40-50% ng kanilang funding. So this is a taste of federalism. Gustong-gusto ko po maging senador dahil ginagawa po nila ngayon yung devolution development plan. Kailangan yan, bantayan natin. Natanggalin na natin itong control ng central government. Truly bring it down to the people. So this is a taste of federalism. Meron na tayong desisyon, Mandanas-Garcia ruling. Bantayan natin yon. At yan sinasabi ko sa inyo para magtulong-tulong tayo na magbantay para ma-devolve ang duties to the lowest level. At gusto ko nga sabihin sa lahat ng kabataan, alam nyo, itong usapan natin, ako yung dating kabataan, pero palagay ko ako naman ay may batang puso pa rin. At sana magkahawaan tayo. Ako, pagka nakakausap ko kayo, nahahawa ako sa inyong idealismo at tapang. Sana mahawa rin naman kayo sa aming eksperyensya, sa aming kahit konti nakuhang wisdom para pagka pinagsama-sama natin, gaganda naman ang ating bansa.
All right, thank you so much, Sir Jopet Sison. Okay, do we have some more follow-up questions from the panel? Okay, there are none. Now let's move on to the next senatorial candidate to answer the same question. Let us call on Attorney Agnes Bailen. Attorney?
Yes, can you flash again the question again? Kasi I think the original question is really something to do how to prevent violent extremism sa mga youth, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So the question is, how do we ensure that the youth are actively engaged in peace-building programs and initiatives? We know that the youth need to be guided by the elders, the parents, the family, so that they will be more gentle, peace-loving citizens. Unfortunately, our nation has been colonized. So the indigenous cultural communities, the indigenous people, who, because they decided to, to flee from the colonizers, went inside. They went up to the mountains, and so they left the coastal areas. And this is the natives that were colonized and integrated into the Western society and culture. So we have two separate kind of system, because the dominant system is the one that was introduced by the Western colonizer, and that is the Regalian Doctrine. The Regalian Doctrine kasi presumes that all lands are owned by the government, except those lands that belong to private individuals. Kaya we have the Torrens title. Now, forgotten are the lands that really belong to the ICCs and the IPs. Because for these IPs and the ICCs, the land, okay, is owned by the community. And that will be passed on from generation to generation. It cannot be owned by one person or the community. Unfortunately nga, because of the clash of culture nga, then there is a problem recognizing, accepting the different ways of appreciating talaga culture. Kaya what's happening right now is the clash of civilization na prevalent ngayon na coming up in different parts of the world, wherein the indigenous people, long neglected, are now asserting their right vis-a-vis their fellow uh, natives, or the fellow Filipinos. For example, we're talking about the Philippines. We have the Filipinos, the dominant Christians, who are now asserting the Regalian Doctrine, that they own the land. And this was instituted when the Spaniards came over. They introduced the Regalian Doctrine. And so the lands became privatized. And then a lot of these people who don't know anything about the Regalian Doctrine were taken advantage of. And primarily, karamihan po dito ay yung mga taong no read, no write, yung mga taong mga members sa mga IPs. Kaya ngayon, it's still continuing. And many IPs are now being forced out of their land. So I think this is the reason why there is radicalization and extremism happening. And so because they feel that the government is no longer listening to them, they have no other way to turn to except to protect them and go to violent means, because they cannot protect their rights by peaceful means. So what can we do now? So it's about time that our government really try to reconcile talaga the Regalian Doctrine vis-a-vis the ancestral domains. Of course, the IPRA of 1997. 1997 pa to. Pero hanggang ngayon, yung cultural mapping pa rin ng mga indigenous communities, hindi pa ho ayos. As pointed out by my fellow senatorial candidates right now, hindi pa tapos. So, hanggang anong claim? Alam niyo naman pa ang nangyayari po ngayon, di ba? Maraming mga IPs na tinatakot ng mga makapangyarihan, pinapress silang umalis sa kanilang mga lugar, and then there are other people entering their land and asserting their rights that they are supposed to be the ones who should be given the ancestral domain. So I think it's about time that the government should really come up really with a meeting of all the peoples of the Philippines. NCIP, okay, must ensure that the customs, traditions of these IPs are really talagang documented for us to understand them, because they're asserting a different way of life, a different set of culture, different set of laws. So how can we appreciate them as lawyers? For example, ako, abogado ako. Hindi namang ibig sabihin na ang mga IPs natin, okay, na wala rin po silang, kahit hindi ho sila members ng Integrated Bar of the Philippines, meron po dyan yung mga, for example, as I mentioned nga sa akin Facebook, yung pangat, di ba, yung mga elders, sila yung nagde-determine po ng mga customs and traditions. So it's about the NCIP, okay, come up with these documents of the customs, traditions of this NCIP. And I'm wondering kung meron ba talaga silang nagawang ganito. Because to be able to understand their claim, we have to find out ano ba yung source ng claim na to, di ba? So we can really read it and compare it and accept it kasi kailangan talaga we have to respect, we have to tolerate one another because what we are pushing right now is development where no one is left behind. Unfortunately nga, ang pinakaapi nga talaga ngayon ay yung mga IPs kasi nga no read, no write sila. In fact, nakikita natin, ang media palaging ina-highlight pag merong graduate na isang abogado, naging doktor, coming from an IP, napaka-big deal to. Kasi kukunti lang po talaga ang mga IPs talaga natin na nakakapagtapos po, nagiging professional po. Kasi po, it means they have to leave their community and go to the urban areas. And when they do that, somehow they lose touch with their community, with what makes them indigenous. So NCIP must ensure that the cultural integrity of the IPs and the ICCs are protected and make sure that development, the education of the IPs will really be protected and promoted by the state because long neglected na nga ito. So ang nangyayari, when I look at nga the DepEd plan noong 2015, tinanong ko sila, because I'm former budget secretary, di ba po? Budget undersecretary. And I asked them, because I'm also promoting the IPs nga when I was a DBM undersecretary, I checked, sa cultural mapping ba, bakit mas malaki ang budget sa region na ito? Ibig bang sabihin nito, mas marami bang IPs dito sa region na to, kaya mas malaki ang appropriation? Now, unfortunately, hindi po. Okay? Kasi may mga magagaling na mga lawmakers, magaling silang mag-lobby at mas malakas sila, kaya yung budget na napupunta sa region nila, mas malaki, notwithstanding the fact na kukunti lang po ang IPs dito. So I think it's really about time that the comprehensive land use program of the LGUs take into account talaga kung sino ba talaga ang mga ICCs and IPs in their LGU so that they can report it to the central governments para ma-plot na po talaga natin yung cultural map talaga ng Philippines natin para talagang malaman natin ano ba yung baseline. Kasi up to now, ano ba talaga yung baseline? Hindi ba dapat noong 1997 ang baseline? Pero unfortunately, nagbabago nga yung mga members ka ng mga IP kasi pinipilit palayasin, dinidisenfranchise yung mga IPs ng mga taong walang respeto because tingin nila ang importante lang sa kanila is to get more and more and they think they can do that by driving away these IPs because they think na mga mangmang sila, they don't respect the IPs, but they don't know na these IPs are really the repositories talaga of our history as a Filipino people because that's our identity and it's about time that they are respected and they are protected and given the proper recognition and protection and support by the people making the laws and the people implementing and executing the laws of the land.
All right, thank you so much, Attorney Bailen. Now let's hear the follow-up question from our panelist, Mr. Hosea Encarnacion. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Attorney Bailen. What stuck with me with your response to how we could address the root cause of violent extremism in our country was the Indigenous Peoples Assembly that you mentioned, where we would call for an assembly of all of the indigenous peoples groups across the Philippines. I would like to share an insight. I think that how we approach the needs of our indigenous peoples today is rather reactive than proactive. Meaning when they start complaining on or when they start assembling for what they believe in, our government responds minimally to what they need. But rather, I appreciate how you noted the approach that we should go to them and ask them what they need specifically. Because as communities of indigenous peoples, they would know what they need the most. Specifically, how, hindi ba? Okay po. No, it's not really an assembly, but strengthening their IP's indigenous political structure for each of the tribes. Opo, so as a future senator, ma'am, how would we achieve this through legislation? We already have the Indigenous Peoples Commission, if I'm not mistaken, and how do we empower the existing structures that we have in order to achieve what you have been proposing briefly, ma'am?
Yeah, I was shocked because I was invited to attend kasi a birthday celebration of one IP leader. And they came up with this ancestral title. And they mentioned that they already parang have titled at least half of the archipelago of the Philippines belonging to IPs. Eh, 'di ba, merong pong kasi sa land, sa registration po, may certain degree. I think my fellow as Attorney Jopet Sison can correct me or can help me. Yung degrees, I think 18% pa, kasi a little over 18%, may certain level yan, eh. Hindi puwedeng i-private ownership, 'di ba? Kaso nga lang, pati yung mga mountains, ini-issue nga sa kanila. So, hindi ba dapat regalyang doctrine ito? So ayun ang gusto kong i-point out. Hindi na natin puwedeng burahin ang nangyari sa past, 'di ba? Kasi nga nandiyan na yung mga titles. May Torrens title na, 'di ba? Nag-pass on na 'yan from one owner to the next. Unfortunately nga, um, hindi ibig sabihin na nandito na yung mga IPs, eh pagpapatuloy natin because we are a republican form of government, di ba? We are a democratic form of government. Ibig sabihin yan, the majority rules. But we also have certain provisions in our constitution, in our law, that we also give importance to the rights of the minorities, meaning the ICCs and the IPs. So I think it is really about time na iupo talaga natin ang mga IPs natin. Kasi yung NCIP, um, yun nga, dapat i-document nyo nga. Kasi in fact, nung nandun ako, DBM Undersecretary, tinatanong ko, ilan ba ang mga IPs natin sa Pilipinas? Sabi ko, I want a data kung ilan ang mga Tibolis, di ba? Ilan ang mga Igorot, di ba? Ilan ang mga Ibanag, di ba? Ilan ang mga Muslim? Ay sa mga Muslim, ang dami niyan. May Tausug, may Mindanawans, di ba? May mga so inihingi ko yung data na 'to, pero iba yung data na nasa PSA compare sa NCIP. Hindi ba dapat pareho yung data na 'yan? Because when we compute sa DBM kung how to appropriate, usually we counted by number of people. 'Di ba? For example, magkano appropriate mo. Ngayon, kung hindi mo alam talaga kung ilan talaga, kaya kailangan meron talaga tayong mapping talaga. Sabi nga, nandiyan na ngayong cultural mapping. So, ang gusto ko, kung sakasakali pong magiging senador ako, iuupo ko po ang NCIP, ang PSA, ang land LRA, para maayos na talaga natin yung titling talaga. Yung nasa regalian doctrine, yung sa mga torrents, nakaayos yan, alam natin. Pero yung mga ancestral domain, dapat nakaayos din yan para alam natin na ito na talaga yun, hindi na mag-expand, hindi na liliit. Kasi nakafix na to for this community. For example, o kung sa mga tausugs talaga to, sa mga tausugs talaga to. O kung ito ay nasa mga ita, di ba? Sa mga ita talaga to. So, ayun yung kailangan talagang maayos natin at mapresenta. So far, I haven't seen that map that will guide policymakers to ensure talaga that the rights of the IPs, the ICCs are protected.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Bailen. And I think Sir Roy Cabonegro would also like to, add some more or maybe ask a further question to Attorney Bailen. Go ahead, Sir Roy.
Hindi, ang gusto ko lang pong idagdag, ang isang problema kasi diyan ay yung ating pong pag-treat between CAD-C and CAD-T. Kasi yung CAD-C kailangan i-transform into CAD-T para nakarehistro siya sa Land Registration Authority, no? At dito tumatagal because of the Joint Administrative Order number 1 noong 2015 na naglimitan itong proseso na to, lalong tumagal. Kaya nga 6 years na walang na-transform into CAD-T. By itself, this is injustice dahil ito po hindi regular na lupa na kailangan mo pang hindi kasi ang estado ang nagbibigay nito. Ito exempted sa regalian doctrine. Dahil sabi ng Supreme Court, ang dami ng jurisprudence dito, na this is a private collectively owned land na time immemorial ay sa kanila, nauna sa Estado. It is not for the state to give because you cannot give what you don't own. You cannot give what you don't own. We simply have to recognize. And recognition means, yung CADC and CADT, walang pinagkaiba talaga yan. Ang proseso ng CADT is just a technical process para magkaroon talaga ng demarcation sa mapa at marehistro talaga sa LRA. Ang ginawa kasi nila dyan because of Joint Administrative Order number 1 of 2015, ay ginawa tinechnical nila yung proseso para walang ma-release na CADT. This is by itself a very big injustice. Matagal na sanang na-resolve ito kung yung JAW na yan ay hindi in-implement. At kung yung treatment natin sa ancestral domain ay hindi tulad ng treatment natin sa ibang lupa. Tinitreat kasi natin siya tulad ng ibang lupa. Hindi po siya pagmamayari ng Estado. It never has been. It is exempted from the Regalian Doctrine. Huwag nating ipilit na i-apply ang Regalian Doctrine sa isang teritoryo na never na naging sa Estado. Pilipino rin po sila. Pero hindi nauna po yan bago nagkaroon ng Philippine State. We simply have to recognize. And we have to put a deadline sa recognition. Dahil hindi po pwedeng time immemorial din ba ang pag-recognize? Magigera po talaga tayo.
So, yeah, if I may comment, Shay.
Go ahead, Sir John.
Kanina napag-usapan nga natin, may binanggit tayong dalawang batas, yung IPRA law na approved in 1997. So siguro meron tayong makukuha doon na kailangan nating implement. And yung binabanggit na National Land Use Act, ito ay hindi na lang merely CLUP because CLUP is limited to the particular jurisdiction of the local government units. Palagay ko kung ang pinag-uusapan natin ay ancestral domain and IP property, we have to approve immediately the National Land Use Act and match it with the IPRA law para nang sa gayon, maglagay na rin tayo. So looking forward ito, if this is a proposed legislation, nalagyan natin yung National Land Use Act ng tuldok kung kailan dapat ma-implement. Nandiyan na rin yung pagpupondo. Kailangan mapondohan para mamarkahan at mamunan yung mga properties. And we respect also what has been approved since 1997. Kung meron kailangan ng amendments dyan or corrections, then we all include it in the NLUA. Ako po yung magpapaalam sa inyo at pasensya po, meron pong nag-iintay lang sa amin na meeting. Maraming salamat sa pagkakataon at it's always been a pleasure talking with the youth. Ako po yung bumabata rin pagkakausap ko and marami akong natututunan sa ating mga kapwa kandidato, lalong-lalo na kay Senatorial Roy Cabanegro at kay Attorney Biden. So maraming salamat sa pagkakataon binigay po naman sa akin.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Jopet Sison, for sharing your time with us. And by the way, for everybody's information, we are until 10 p.m. So maybe if Sir Jopet can still come back later on, you are very much welcome po, Sir.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sir Jopet. And thank you to the other senatorial candidates for answering the question. All right, so this time, do you still have some more follow-up question? I think it's from panelist Sir Hosea. Go ahead, sir. If you have
yes, hello. Sorry for I plead ignorance, Mr. Cabanegro and Attorney Bailen. I'm not really that knowledgeable regarding this topic. However, what I can see from what you've described is that there is significant pushback from our government and the private sector to prioritize recognizing the lands of our indigenous peoples as their own. As future senators, if given the chance, how will we work around this if there is significant pushback from the private sector, business sector who will benefit and profit from using ancestral lands for their own use?
Diba?
Yes po.
Well, sa akin simple lang ang step by step diyan. Una, tuldukan ang deadline ng recognition. All CADT must be recognized within a certain period. Hindi yung open-ended. I suggest the first 2 years. Kompletohin lahat ng CADT recognition, which means lahat ng CADC ma-convert into CADT marehistro sa Land Registration Authority. No if, no buts. Kasi pinapatagal yan ng JAW. Unang alisin dyan yung JAW. That's number one. Number two, how can the IPs really develop kung ang kanilang indigenous political structure ay hindi naman gumagana at wala silang control sa kanilang kaunlaran? Pondohan natin ang kanilang ADS DPP, yung kanilang development plan. Napaka-unfair kasi na kung paano natin tinatrato yung mga LGU na may sariling ira dahil may sariling plano, may sariling teritoryo at mga Pilipinong nagbabayad ng tax ay hindi natin ina-apply sa mga ancestral domain. Bakit? Hindi ba sila Pilipino? Hindi ba sila nagbabayad ng tax? Hindi ba sila may teritoryo at hindi ba sila may plano? Ano bang pinagkaiba ng ADS DPP sa development plan ng LGU? Wala. Siguro karamihan lang sa atin hindi alam kung ano yung ADS DPP at kung anong laman ng ADS DPP. Kung hindi nyo alam, abay pag-aralan ninyo. Dahil may sariling mga gobyerno yung mga yan, kailangan natin silang pondohan. Pag ginawa natin silang namamalimos lang para sa sariling kaunlaran, sila po'y nauuwing namamalimos para sa mga korporasyon, para sa mga royalty. Hindi naman po tama yan, no? Na kailangan nilang i-give up ang kanilang mga development option dahil ang kanilang nagbibigay lang ng pera sa kanila ay private companies. Responsibilidad ng Estado na paunlarin ang ating mga ancestral domain. Dahil Pilipino din sila, hindi po ito maliit na lugar. 20 to 30% ng ating teritoryo ay ancestral domain. Hindi po maliit na populasyon ng indigenous people. Ang indigenous people is estimated between 15 to 20 million. Let us not romanticize these IPs na sila ay minority. Tigilan natin yung kakatawag sa kanila ng ganyan. Culturally, they might be, but they are holding in their hands 20 to 30% of our lands and they are 20 million. They are a force to reckon with for national development. At doon sa green commune na sinasabi ko na pansagot sa ating climate adaptation, sila ang solusyon kasi saan natin kukunin ng lupa para doon sa green commune. Napakarami po, 11 million po ang mawawala ng bahay ng biglaan dahil sa climate change. Saan mo ilalagay yan? Magpapatayan tayo para magkabahay lang. Karamihan po dyan sa upland kukunin. 7 to 12 meters po ang itataas ng ating tubig. 70% of our population living in coastal area, particular sa southern seaboard natin. Saan natin ilalagay yung mga tao na yan? Karamihan dyan ikukunin natin sa ancestral domain. Kaya ayusin na natin ang ating problema sa ancestral domain. Sila ay solusyon sa ating problema sa climate adaptation. Let us stop romanticizing them. Let us give them their due because they're Filipinos. Ano ba naman tayo? Lagi na lang natin tinignan, kawawa sila. Sila ay solusyon sa ating problema. Let us give them their due.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Roy, and also to Sir Hosea. So are there any other follow-up questions from the panel? Okay, now let's proceed to the next question. So for this question, the first one to give their answer is from, okay, we go back to Attorney Agnes Bailen. For the third question, it is coming from panelist Mr. Michael Ermac. Sir, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So my question is, there have been several cases of the so-called red tagging in our country. So the youth shouts, activism is not terrorism. So as legislator, how do you improve the current system in countering the activities of the communists or the NPA and other notorious groups who take advantage of the vulnerabilities and idealism of the youth, especially the students and indigenous people po?
Okay, so I think this stems from the Anti-Terrorism Act nga, di ba, which is really an amendment of the previous National Security Act that was passed, I think, in 2007 about 2009, wherein the state balances, di ba, the right to protect itself vis-a-vis those groups wanting to express themselves, but not to the extent of expressing themselves in a violent way that will really promote terrorism, which is really considered now as an act that is really frowned upon not only in the Philippines but also in the international community. In fact, in my debates nga, there are, the rightists who are saying this there are already some groups that have already been identified as CPP, so they are really criminals. That's what they're saying. Because as provided nga in the Anti-Terrorism Act nga, pag nakalista sila sa United Nations list nga, automatic, they are already considered nga as criminals, and they can be arrested, by our authorities. Now, at that time kasi, when this was passed, I was at DBM. I was really more focused on, capacitating our various agencies. But this year, I was able to review nga yung anti-terrorism. And I saw nga na may mga provisions doon na medyo, I think, kailangan talagang i-amend. If we remember, yung custody kasi, dati, pag uhulihin mo ang isang tao at walang warrantless arrest because nga assumption nga is violator nga sila, the police authorities, can not present them sa judge. I think please correct me, I can't remember, at least 10 ba or 14 days, and that can be extended by another 10 days. Before, 48 hours lang kailangan mong i-present. Tapos kung titignan mo nga yung mga penalties, halos pare-pareho, may life imprisonment, tapos si accomplice. So parang feeling ko, so I look at the one who passed this law, di ba? Ang nag-pass nga nitong law nga natin, ang author nga nito ay si Senator Lacson, I think, and then si Senator Amy Marcos, and I think sa House naman, I think si Congressman Bravo ang nag-pass ito. And I look nga at their background, and parang they're not really lawyers. So parang feeling ko yung concept of human rights mukhang hindi masyadong nag-sink in sa nila kasi nandun sila sa perspective ng mga authorities trying to institute law and order, at at hindi masyadong na-appreciate from the perspective of people expressing freedom of expression, which is really a basic right that is guaranteed talaga in our constitution. So so far that's my idea on this matter, unless there are other follow-up questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney Bailen. Okay, do we have follow-up questions from our panelists? Okay, we have from Mr. Hans Ambalong. Go ahead, Sir Hans.
Hello, thank you so much, Attorney Agnes Bailen. There are many points that you've mentioned or that you have specified that there are many areas of concern in this certain act, the Anti-Terror Act. So my question, as a legislator, do you think that this should take priority once you are seated on the Senate? And how would you convince, since this has been a big issue in our country, especially on our youth. It has been echoed in the social media platforms, in the streets. It is very evident that people are going against this act. But it has still been passed in the Senate, has been signed even by our president. How would you convince your fellow members of the Senate that this needs amendment? And which areas of concern should you highlight in order for this bill to be pushed through? I mean, your amendment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hanso. Kasi talagang this is really talaga a very controversial. In fact, the law even before was really brought before the Supreme Court, diba? And the Supreme Court already ruled that there are that the law stands. It's not unconstitutional, but there are certain provisions that were struck down. And I think yung the right, to express grievance basta walang threat, I think sa life, 'di ba? Kasi yun yung mahaba yung provision na yun medyo. So unang-una, kailangan nating reviewin yung mga penalties. What I noticed, yung mga penalties halos pare-pareho. alam mo yung gravity nitong for example, accomplice, accessory, 'di ba yan eh, and then 'pag ikaw yung principal, parang napakakonti lang, negligible lang yung penalty. And in law, the offense, okay, and the penalty must be commensurate to each other. O for example, sa atin, 'di ba, pinakaimportante right to life. Pero 'pag pumatay ka ng buhay, kumitil ka ng buhay, dapat ang napakalaki sa atin, 'di ba? But under the law right now, kapag ikaw nakapatay, usually ang compensation lang sa buhay ng isang tao I think is 75,000. 75,000 na. Pero dito sa anti-terrorism law, napakalaki ng fine na napakahaba. So I think ito kailangan nating i-reviewin to. Also, yung custody. Dati, sa custody, dapat 48 hours lang kailangan i-present na kagad kay judge yung mga warrantless arrest. Pero dito, nagulat na lang ako na 14 days yata. Please correct me, hindi ko na masyadong matanda kung 14 days on 10 days. Tapos, pwede pa niyang i-extend ng another 10 days, di ba? Gagawa lang siya ng rason, yung law enforcement. And then, kung medyo na late ka, parang hindi masyadong mataas yung penalty as far as the law enforcement officer is concerned. Pero kung ikaw yung supposedly na red tag, ikaw yung nagcha-challenge, napakalaki ng penalty mo kung tutuusin. Hindi ba dapat yung estado dapat, because napakalaki ng kapangyarihan ng estado. Kasi tapos yung individual, napakalaki ng penalty, pero yung mga part ng estado na nag-implement ng batas, pag sila ay nagkasala, violation dito, kokonti lang, hindi ganun kalaki yung penalty. So ito yung kailangan talagang tutukan. Now, how do I convince? By my power of persuasion. Kasi at the end of the day naman, di ba, sa Kongreso talaga, it's really number of votes. We can deliberate on the bill, di ba? And then I can present my argument